So you're gaining strength but not size. I get this question very frequently, and it's actually only common in beginners because here's the deal. This person was confused because my fitness philosophy largely revolves around getting strong at a handful of big compound lifts because that's how you're going to build your physique. So this person was wondering why they didn't see the equivalent in muscle mass from the strength they were gaining. And in this video, we're going to go over a few different reasons why this is happening. And the first reason really is because you're a beginner, and it's because of a concept called muscular proficiency, neuromuscular proficiency, whereby the first chunk of strength that you gain on your lifts, let's say you put 50 pounds on your squat from your starting point, it's not necessarily all correlated to muscle mass. Some of it is, but a lot of it is just going to be you getting more proficient at the lift. It's going to be you getting better at performing it, activating the right muscle fibers, bracing your core, driving your legs into the ground. It's going to be you improving your technique and your ability to fire the right muscle fibers during the lift. So really, you need to get to a certain strength level before every bit of strength that you gain can be tied to an increase in muscle mass. So you really need to get to kind of that intermediate stage where, you know, you finished out your noob gains, you finished out the first chunk of strength you're going to gain, and that's really when you're going to start to see the one-to-one basically correlation between the strength you gain and the muscle mass that you gain. So that's really the first reason why, and this is the most common. And the reason why I say this is most common in beginners is because really, you know, as a beginner, you can get away with putting on strength in very suboptimal conditions because you're so new to lifting. So you're so new to the stimulus, you're so new to the exercises that you could be completely fucking around and still be gaining a ton of strength on your lifts. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to indicate muscle growth. So what I mean by this is that a lot of beginners, they see that their strength is increasing, so they assume everything's fine. But what they don't realize is they're missing out on a few things that are actually going to actualize the strength into the muscle growth and turn that strength they gained into the muscle tissue. And the next reason why is you're not eating enough. That's really the next common thing. It's so common in beginners because a lot of beginners are not accustomed to kind of the energy needs that come along with really gaining muscle, putting on strength and muscle. And as I said, they can gain strength in very suboptimal conditions. They could be eating in a calorie deficit and they could be putting on strength. And this is what I mean by you can gain strength in suboptimal conditions, because just because you're gaining strength doesn't mean you're turning that strength gain into muscle tissue. And one of the main reasons why is because you're just not fueling your body. You're not giving yourself the building blocks to be able to then go ahead, turn that stimulation into muscle tissue. So you need to make sure you're eating enough. You need to be in a calorie surplus ideally, because really the first chunk of training that you do, you know, the first 6 months to a year, even 2 years, it's going to be the fastest time in your training career where you're going to be putting on muscle at the quickest rate. So you really want to take advantage of that, unless you're obese. And then if you're obese, if you're really overweight, you can actually get away with eating in a calorie deficit and putting on muscle because you have the energy stored as fat tissue. So that's a different scenario. But if you're kind of like average or you're skinny, you need to be bulking. You need to be eating enough. That's going to be an absolute priority if you want to turn the strength you gain into muscle tissue, because really you're already not going to be gaining the equivalent of the strength that you gain in muscle mass. So you want to make sure you're doing everything to gain as much muscle as possible from the strength you do gain, right? So the next reason is sleep, and it's kind of the same analogy. It's like if you want to turn that stimulation into growth, you need to give your body time to recover, time to turn that stimulation into muscle tissue. And most people just don't fucking sleep enough, guys. Most people just don't sleep enough. I, as a lifter, and this is something that nobody really talks about in the fitness industry. Everyone thinks like, yeah, you know, getting enough sleep is a given, but you really need to, as a content creator or someone, you know, teaching fitness, you need to drill into people's heads like, yo, without sleep, you know, what the fuck? You're not, like, sleep is the glue that's going to hold everything together. I don't care if your diet's perfect, if your training is perfect, because your training is not going to be perfect if you're not sleeping enough, first of all. But I don't care if that stuff is okay. If your sleep is not on point, you're not going to be gaining at the fastest rate possible. So you need to make sure you're getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep. I know 10 is a bit excessive for most people, but I go to bed quite early in order to get as much sleep as possible. Ideally, you want to wake up without an alarm. You want to let your body naturally wake up, because if you wake up by an alarm, then you didn't get enough sleep. You didn't get as much sleep as your body needed. So I like to go to bed as early as possible and then naturally let myself wake up early in the morning instead of setting a timer, because if you set a timer, you're not sleeping enough. It's just the fact of the matter. So that's what I like to do. A few tips for good sleep is sleep in a pitch black room. Make sure there's no lights on. Sleep butt ass naked. I like to read 15-20 pages. I like to read about an hour before I go to sleep. that really makes sure my sleep quality is dialed in. You want to turn off all the electronics, TV, phone, laptop. You want to turn that all off 30 minutes to an hour before you go to bed, because if that's going to fuck with your REM cycles. That's why I like to read. It just calms me down, relaxes me, and I fall asleep like that. So those are a few really good tips. I also sometimes take melatonin, 5 to 10 milligrams of melatonin before I go to sleep, because that increases the quality of my sleep and increases the deep sleep. So people think, yeah, you know, if I get enough quantity, then it doesn't matter how quality it is. No, you need both quality and quantity of sleep. So sleep, if you're serious about really building your dream physique, like really putting on muscle, changing your body composition as quick as possible, sleep needs to be your fucking priority. You need to do everything in your power to make sure you're getting enough sleep every night. That is number one. And then really the next one is that you're not training with enough intensity. It's rarely the case that you're not doing enough volume. What it is for most people, and what I've noticed, is that most people's idea of failure is really like 3 to 5 reps shy of failure. Most people don't know how to bring necessary effort. And you know, if you're like a power lifter, then it will benefit you to practice more frequency and not go close to failure, because you really want to get good at the lift. Let's say bench press, you want to really practice the bench press, get good at it, train it frequently, don't ever go to failure. That's okay if you're a power lifter, but if you're someone like myself seeking a balance of muscle and strength, then you want to push things close to failure. So if you're doing a set of 8, and you can actually get 8, but you stop at 5, you're not stimulating as much muscle growth as you possibly could. You need to really push. Those last few reps are really what's going to stimulate that muscle growth. So you need to make sure you're pushing almost as hard as possible. You don't want to ever hit failure. You don't want to ever miss a rep. Ideally, it may happen, but ideally you never want to miss a rep. You want to push things close to where you have like zero reps left, or at maximum like 1 rep left. So that's the next thing. And as I said, it's rarely ever volume. Everyone's like, you know, you're not doing enough volume to stimulate growth. And it's, if you're training hard, if you're bringing necessary effort and you're training big lifts, you can't do that much volume. I think it's actually, I think too much volume is actually the problem for most people. They do too much volume to the point where they can't ever gain any significant strength, and then they never gain muscle mass. So that's never the problem. Don't worry so much about the volume. Really worry about dialing your effort, dialing in on the effort, bringing as much intensity as you can on the sets you do. Bring concentration, focus, tenacity, really fucking push hard in your training. And you're not gonna be able to do that much, guys. You know, you're not gonna be able to do that much. I built my physique training 2 to 3 days per week. You know, five or so exercises per workout, couple sets each exercise. But I fucking train hard, and I train on the big compound lifts that stimulate a lot of muscle growth. So that's really where your focus needs to be, and that's really it for this video. So as I said, keep in mind, you know, as a beginner, you can get away with putting on strength in a lot of suboptimal conditions, but you're not necessarily going to see the equivalent of muscle mass unless you make sure everything is dialed in. Even if everything's dialed in, the first chunk of strength you gain is not always going to be tied. You're obviously going to gain muscle mass because you're going to be gaining noob gains, but it's not going to be as tightly correlated to strength you gain. At the point of lifting that I'm at right now in my life, I'm pretty advanced. So every strength, every piece of strength I gain, every 5 pounds I add to the bar is a correlation to muscle growth. So every bit of strength I add at this point in my lifting career is going to be tied to an increase in muscle mass, but it's not the same as a beginner. And beginners are usually cutting themselves short in one of those departments, either the effort, the sleep, or the eating. More often than not, you know, it's actually more often than not all three, but I think eating and sleeping is really the part where most people go wrong. And you know, because the reality is, you need to make sure this is dialed in, especially at the beginner stage, because you're not going to know. You're not really going to know, unless of course you aren't gaining any muscle mass. But you're not going to know because of the strength, because you're going to be gaining strength regardless, because you're so new to it. You're a noob. So you're going to be gaining strength regardless. But you know, when you become an intermediate advanced lifter, you simply aren't going to be able to put on a lot of muscle and strength without dialing in on those principles. So your body will quickly tell you, like, yo, fix the fuck up. Like you're missing out on, you're not hitting, you're not attending one of these key principles, whether it's sleep, eating. So when you're more intermediate advanced, you're going to know, like, oh shit, I'm cutting things short in some department, because you're not going to be gaining muscle, gaining strength. But as a beginner, you kind of have to keep more of an eye on that, because your body's not necessarily going to tell you. Unless of course you're just not gaining muscle mass. That's a clear-cut sign, because at the beginning of your lifting career, you should be gaining muscle mass. It's going to be the quickest, you're going to see the quickest rate of muscle gain in the first, year or two of your training. So really keep that in mind. So don't cut anything short in any department. Make sure your sleep's on point, your eating's on point, make sure you're in a calorie surplus, really taking advantage of those first couple years of training, which is where you're going to gain the most muscle mass. You're going to put on like 50% of the muscle you're going to gain in those first few years. So take advantage, eat in a calorie surplus unless you're fat, of course, and then you can recomp. And that's really it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed this, drop a like, subscribe. Make sure you pick up my 13-point natural muscle building assessment. It's a checklist that's going to make sure you're delivering on all of the key elements to building your physique as a drug-free lifter. If you stick to that checklist, you check everything off, you can be assured that you are maximizing your physique as a drug-free lifter. So we'll talk soon. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Take care.